You see, with the unfortunate events going on in the Middle East, and of course what's happening in Eastern Europe, it might be kind of easier for us to forget that things going on in Africa also have the potential of influencing the global politics. And one of such events I really want to highlight for us today is the resurgence of coups on the continent. I'm very sure that in the last few years, you probably have seen some of these headlines. Yeah, headlines like this. When there are coups in Africa and people troop into the streets in their thousands to celebrate military takeover. And you probably wonder, why will Africans be celebrating military takeover? Also because if you cast your mind to the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, several African countries had bloody coups, which in many cases snowballed into civil wars. And I think we perhaps recall the case of Rwanda and the Biafran War in Nigeria that led to the death of millions of people. So why on earth will Africans be celebrating coups today? I want us to focus on these 5 countries. I'm going to be using them as case studies: Burkina Faso, Niger, Guinea, Mali, and Gabon. These were the leaders deposed. And you can see some connecting threads here. First is that several of these leaders seem to have been in power since the 80s and 90s. I mean, in fact, some of them are dynastic presidents, where you have a father being the former head of state and the son succeeding the father, like you will have in a monarchy. But also you can see that the age of these leaders is starkly different from the average age of their people. The average age in Africa, you can see here, is 18, 15, 16, 21, but the leaders are so old. But what this means is that collectively they tell us that these sets of leaders were so alienated from their people. Their reality doesn't seem to match the reality of the people. And also, these 5 countries, as you can see on this table, are very, very much impoverished. And these were under the leaders, these deposed leaders, who have been in power since the 90s and early 2000s. But also we know that in countries where there are lower economic freedom, oftentimes those countries are often quite liable to be impoverished. And this is the case here, where you have about 4 of these countries on the 4th quartile on the Economic Freedom of the World Index, which is not surprising. And closely followed to the economic freedom factor is the human freedom in those countries. I mean, these countries have one of the most horrendous human rights violations under these deposed leaders. So you can see that these internal factors are quite serious. But we can't really make sense of why this is happening in Africa without talking about the external factors. And I would like for us to pay closer attention to these tables. So to the left, you will see the distribution of EU aid across the world since 2007 to 2023. That's like 16 years or thereabout. And Turkey seems to be the largest recipient of EU aid, 171. And these figures are in the billions of euros. But not too far from Turkey are 3 of those African countries where you've had coups. And also to the right is the American foreign aid distribution. And what these kind of tell us is that often in the West, we think that American taxpayers' dollars or European taxpayers' pounds and euros go into Africa to support humanitarian effort and strengthen democracies. I mean, to a large extent, they do not do that. What they often do is go into Africa to subsidize tyranny, to subsidize dictators, because those money oftentimes do not make it into the hands of Africans. Majority of them goes into the coffers of the states, which are to a large extent controlled by these dictators. And even in cases where you have infrastructures built, those infrastructures are used as political leverage during election season to perpetuate these leaders in power. So we also see recently the rise of Russian and Chinese interests on the continent, where both Putin and the Communist Party in China have openly supported coup leaders. And in their own imagination, their purpose is to balance the power dynamics on the continent, which has almost zero interest for Africans. Africans have no interest in all this neo-Cold War politics. So what does this mean? What does it tell us? Well, it tells us 4 things. First is that the African elites are so distant from their people. The second is that foreign intervention from the East and the West and China recently are causing chaos on the continent, further impoverishing our people to a large extent, and perpetuating the violation of human rights, because many African leaders who get aid from the EU, from China, from Russia, stay in power. And they have to violate human rights for them to perform their ability to control the public. And one of the consequences, as we've seen recently, is the mass exodus of Africans away from the continent, many of them crossing the Mediterranean and dying, unfortunately. And when we see this in the West, our instinct oftentimes is to give Africa more aid, more support, when in fact, the majority of this money are often mismanaged by the dictators in power. Some of them go into corruption and financial waste. And I think there should be some solution to be profiled here. And here are my 4 challenges in terms of solution. The first is that I would like for us, particularly those of us from the continent of Africa, doing civil society work, intellectual entrepreneurs, to advocate for the strengthening of the informal economy and African entrepreneurs. Because as you see, vast majority of our people are in the informal economy. So maybe strengthening the informal economy can alleviate poverty. The second is for us to protect the rule of law as civil society intellectual entrepreneurs, and also to appreciate or reinvigorate the African value of consensus and ask our people to move away from this idea that one strong man can bring about prosperity. And personally, as a historian, I would like to emphasize the 4th one, more so to my American and European friends, that please tell your government to stop funding dictators in Africa. Tell your government to not turn Africa into the new site of Cold War. Our priorities are different from war. Our priorities are different from the priorities of perpetuating this superpower challenge on our continent. And for a people that is so impoverished and their dignity grossly violated and their land gradually turning into the new site of this superpower contest, there ain't too many options. So when you see coups on the continent, people will be happy. But it's our job as African civil society intellectual entrepreneurs and supporters of those society to go into these countries and help our people understand that coup can never be the answer. That civil society needs to work to protect the rule of law and encourage economic reforms that will bring about prosperity. And we need to do this from one African country at a time. Thank you.